Hello guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to see how we can set up a brand new Angular 2 application. So we basically have three main ways that we can go about getting started using Angular 2. The first way is to go to angular.io and then go to this Get Started link. And this is going to give us a guide of how we can manually set up a new application. So this is a process that we're actually going to go through in this video. And before we do that, I wanted to show you the other two ways. So the second way, and the one that's going to be used by most people once you get going with Angular, is using their CLI tool. So you would install the Angular CLI via your Node terminal by typing npm install, then globally installing the Angular CLI, and then you would create a new application by using these commands inside of the folder that you want to create your new app in. And this is, I believe, is still an alpha, so we're not going to be using it in this course at this moment, but I'll probably add something to the end showing you how to use this tool once it becomes fully released. And then the third way is to use one of the already established generators. So if you were to search Angular 2 within GitHub, you're going to find a few different already done for you generator templates that you can download. And this is going to be my point of reference also for the course. And it's not fully updated yet, but once I update it, you can download the starter folder. And this is going to download the starting template that I'm going to walk you through right now. And you can also find this template located within the resources of this video. So we're going to go ahead and do this manually. And to start off with, I've opened up my Sublime Text. And within my Sublime Text, I have a folder called Dev Books, and this is a folder that's located on my desktop. So I've also navigated to the location of Dev Books within my desktop. And now let's go ahead and look at the starter guide. So we've created the project folder. Now we need to create the configuration files. So the first thing that they tell us to do is to create a package.json, a tsconfig.json, a typings.json, and a system.js.config.json file. So I'm going to go ahead and create each one of these files now. And I'll do that by going back into my Sublime Text. And I'll say new file. So the first file that we need is our package.json. I'm going to flip back over to our Getting Started guide, and I'm going to copy the code, go back over and paste this in. And we'll go back to the top. So we'll leave it as Angular Quick Start. And let's just take a look at our dependencies real quick. So we're going to be downloading all of our Angular core files right here. We'll be downloading the latest version of Bootstrap, as well as some other libraries that allow our code to work on a variety of different browsers. And then for the dev dependencies, these will create a server so that we're able to run our application locally. And then of course we also need to download typings and Typescript. The next file that we need is ts.config. So we'll go over here and create a new file. It was called tsconfig.json. And copy this code over, paste it in. This JSON file defines the settings for a TypeScript compiler. So whenever our TypeScript compiler is run, we'll get new JavaScript files for each one of our TypeScript files inside of our application. Note here that the target is ES5, meaning that the new JavaScript files created are going to be in ES5 or ECMAScript 5 browser readable code. Then we have a typings.json file. So go back over, new file, and then we'll name it typings.json. And I'll copy over the code, paste it in. So typings is for TypeScript, and you'll see a new typings folder installed when we actually download our npm files. And again, this just helps make TypeScript into browser readable code. And finally, we have our system.js.config.js file. So new file, system.js.config.js. Go back over, copy over this code, paste it in. So this file is pretty well commented. It says that this is the main configuration file for Angular 2. And this is going to tell your application where to find their node modules. It's going to set up a reference for NPM to find our Angular files right here. It's going to set up RxJS, which is used for services. And it's going to define the main application packages as far as where to find the files when we're bootstrapping and serving our application. So I'll go ahead and save all and open this up so you can see these 4 files. So with these 4 files defined, we can go ahead and type npm install. And after running npm install, you'll see all of these folders created for npm, as well as a typings folder for our typings.json. So I'll go back into my terminal and type npm install. So once everything is downloaded, you should see some printouts similar to what's found right here. And if I go back into my Sublime text, you'll notice that we should see now a node modules folder and a typings folder. And if we open these up, you should see a globals and then all of our Angular modules right here. Okay, so now we're 2/3 done with setting up our app. If you don't see a typings folder installed, you should type npm run typings install in order to install that typings folder. So now let's go ahead and create our application. The first thing they advise us is to create a new folder inside of our dev books folder, and I'll do that as they recommend by saying mki dir and then app, which is going to create a new folder right here. And then we want to create a new file inside the app folder called app.module.ts. So I'll right click on my app folder and create a new file called app.module.ts. So this file is going to be the main file that's used in order to bootstrap and load all the other components and dependencies within our Angular application. So go back over, click this copy to clipboard, and go back in and paste. So of course we'll be walking through this a little bit more, but we basically use NgModule in order to load up all of our components and modules for the entire application. Okay, so step 3 says create a component and add it to your application. So let's create a new component, and we're going to call it app.component.ts. So I'll right click my app, say new file, and we'll call it app.component.ts. We'll go back over, we'll copy our code and paste it in. Now I'll save all the files. So once this component is used in our app, it's going to print the message, my first Angular app, with this h1 title tag. And what we need to do in order to make our application know that this component exists is to add this component into our app module. So I'll just go over here and copy in this new code and paste this in. And you can see we basically added a declaration. So any components that we add to our app need to be added to our declarations. We've imported the app component from the location of our app component file. And then we're declaring this app component is the main component for our application. And again, we'll cover this in greater detail in the next couple lectures. So if we click back over here, we see that we need to create a main.ts file. So I'm going to click this copy code, and I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to create a new file in our folder, which is called main.ts. And now I'm going to paste in that code that we copied, clean this up a little bit. And this just contains the standard code that we're going to be using that actually runs our Angular app. Okay, so that does it for our TypeScript files. The last file that we need to include is, of course, our index file. So we scroll down here a little bit, And step 5 is to define the web page that hosts the application. So I'll copy over this code, and our index file goes into the root of our application. So not in the app folder, but in our devbooks folder. I'll create a new file, and I'm going to name it index.html. And now I'll just paste in this code. So if we take a look at this index file, it's basically using our system.js config file in order to set everything up. And we're also adding relations to a few node modules to account for older browsers. So now I'll go ahead and save this file. And now our Angular application setup is complete. So to run our application, all we need to do is switch back into our command prompt and type npm start from the root of our folder. So what this is doing is it's going to compile our Typescript into JavaScript, launch our server, and load up our Angular application. And you can see that it's displaying my first Angular app, which is what we find in the component that we created. After running our application, there's two things that I wanted to point out for you right now. The first is that we used npm start in order to run our application. And the reason that we're able to use that command is because within our scripts in the package.json file, here's the word start, which first compiles Typescript and then launches our server. When Typescript is run, it creates JavaScript files. So inside of our app folder, we can now see that there's 4 new JavaScript files that have been created for us. And these are the files that are running in the browser. So if we open one of them up, we're greeted with JavaScript code that looks similar to what's found in our Typescript file, but again, it has just been converted into JavaScript. So there was a lot of information covered in this video. So if you got lost at a certain point, or if there's something you didn't really understand, don't worry about it, because we're going to be going over this material a number of times so that you can fully grasp really what's going on. The Angular docs tells us that NgModules are used in order to help us organize our application into cohesive blocks of functionality. So let's explore exactly what they mean by that. Recall that when we created our application, one of the first things that we did was to add an app.module.ts file that looks like this. Our app module file is going to contain all of the site-wide modules, components, pipes, and services that we use within our application. In order to use each one of these modules, we first need to import them. We've currently imported the first 3 modules that we'll be using. NgModule is added so that we can use it as a decorator below. Browser module is added so that we can run our app inside of the browser. An app component is added as the root component of our application. As we progress in this course, we'll be adding more components and modules to this file, such as the forms module and the router module. Below that, we see our first use of the TypeScript decorator. Decorators are functions that add extra metadata to the class below. They always begin with an @ symbol and then the name of the decorator. In this case, our decorator is named NgModule, and it will provide information to the class below, which is named AppModule. Notice that our decorator starts with parentheses, indicating that it is a function. Then inside the parentheses, we're also including curly brackets, indicating that we're passing it an object. The object that we define contains key value pairs, just like any other commonly used object, in which we can define certain attributes. The imports key will contain all the Angular libraries used in our application. So far, we've only added the browser module, but soon we'll be adding the forms module and router module to this list. Below that, we have declarations. This will include all of the components, directives, and pipes that we intend to use. And below that, we have the bootstrap key, which tells our application what our root component is when first initializing our application. All of this decorator metadata is then passed into our class called NgModule, which can then be exported and used inside of other files. In the previous video, you learned how to set up our NgModule file that contains site-wide dependencies and components. In this video, you'll learn how we bootstrap our application, which is the process of putting together the minimal pieces needed to run an Angular application. Once we've created our app.module.ts file, the next file we created was the main.ts file, which looked like this. Here we are first importing the platform browser dynamic, which enables our app to run in the browser, as well as the NgModule class. Below that, we define a constant variable of platform, which is set equal to an instance of the platform browser dynamic method. And then below that, we use our platform constant.bootstrap module, passing in our NgModule class. So the bootstrap module is a method inside of the platform browser dynamic that we can access using dot notation. This method accepts a parameter for the module we're using, which passes in all of our application's metadata. Remember, our NgModule class contains all of our initial application metadata, which is expressed here inside of our NgModule decorator. And then this bootstrap key tells Angular that we want to use the app component module as the root component for our site, so that when our site is first loaded up, the template inside of our app component is what first appears on our page. Finally, the selector value of my app is what's placed inside of our index.html file in order to initialize and load up our application. This will be discussed in further detail in our component section. To get you familiar using components, let's reconstruct our app component, making a few changes. I'm going to start out by removing the code currently in our app component file. The first thing I'll do is define my class and name it app component. I want to export this file to make sure that other files can use our component. We'll declare a property within our class and name it page title, followed by a colon, and then the data type of string. Then we can define a default value, which we'll call dev book store. Next, let's go ahead and define the component decorator above the class. We always begin with an @sign, then the name of the decorator. The component decorator is a function, so we need to type parentheses, and then we're going to pass in an object, so we add the curly braces. Notice that we are getting an underline error here, and the reason is because we need to import component from Angular core. So we'll say import, and then we want component, and we're getting this from Angular core. Now the error goes away, and we can complete the metadata. So within our component metadata, we first need to add a selector to provide a name for the directive when used within our HTML. The current convention is to prefix the selector with something to identify as part of our application. So we'll use BS for bookstore, and the second part of the name represents the component name, so we use app. Next, we'll define the template. And with defining the template, we can either reference another file or put in any valid HTML code. In this case, we'll add some HTML directly into the template area. We can use either single or double quotes, or we can also use backticks. And the backticks are located at the top left of your keyboard, and they are needed if you're spreading out your code into more than one line. We can use Angular data binding here to display our page title property defined below. To do this, we just need to add the name of our property inside of curly brackets, and then also add in another line with the text app component test. And that's it. You've now created your first Angular component. But how do we use it? So all we need to do is add the selector that we created called BSApp into our index.html file. Once we've done that, we can go back into our terminal and restart our application. And now we have successfully bootstrapped Angular and are displaying our first component. Pretty sweet. Components are the foundation of modular development. They allow us to separate our code into easy-to-manage chunks based on features and uses. Components descend from other components in a tree-like manner. This app component represents the root component in our tree structure, so that all future components will become a descendant. For example, we could have a navigation component, a sidebar component, and a post component. Then inside any one of these, we can nest other feature-related components. In this example, we could nest sidebar-related component features to create widgets and a calendar. Then if we wanted to, we could easily reuse our widgets and calendar component in other views. And this is what our folder structure would look like for this contrived app, with the widgets and calendar folders located inside of the sidebar folder. The beauty of this modular development style is that each one of these components represent features that we can easily isolate, test, and reuse. This creates dry components in which we're not repeating our code. Additionally, we don't have to worry about any side effects occurring in other parts of our application since our code is contained in its own isolated module. Now that we've explored why building components is a good idea, let's go a little bit deeper to understand exactly what comprises a component and how we should be structuring our components. Components are always comprised of a template, a class, and some metadata. The template is the view layout. It is created with HTML and includes all of the binding, directives, as well as additional syntax that's expressed within the view. Our class is the code that supports the view. It is created using Typescript and includes properties and methods. Properties are used to define data elements, and methods are function expressions used to define some logic. Metadata is the extra data used for our class inside of a decorator. This metadata tells Angular how to instantiate the component, construct a view, and how to interact with other components using directives. In Angular, a class becomes a component when it is given this metadata. Here is our app component that we created as the root component to our application. Recall that the first thing we did was declare our class and export it for use in other modules. We use Pascal casing as our naming convention. This means that we capitalize both words app, which is our feature, as well as component, which is our type. When defining our class composition, we always put properties at the top and use camel casing syntax. So this means that we have the first word lowercase and the second word, if there is one, as uppercase. Methods are placed below properties and also follow the convention of camel casing. We then declared our decorator. Decorators are built-in features of TypeScript and are always prefixed with an ampersand symbol. Angular uses this feature to create custom decorators in order to add additional metadata about the class. When creating our decorators, we're actually just creating functions. And you can tell this is a function because it contains parentheses. Then inside the function, we declare an object. This object has a number of optional properties depending upon our decorator. A few that we've already used are selector, which defines the component directive's name, as well as template, which defines the component's view. We then made sure to import our component features from Angular core, so we're able to create our decorator below. Welcome back to Angular 2 Essential Training. In this video, we're going to go through the process of creating a new nested component to act as a directive, as well as how to use template URL and styles within our component. So let's start out by going into our app folder and create a new folder called Welcome. Inside this Welcome folder, I'm going to add two new files. The first one is called welcome.component.ts, and the second is called welcome.component.html. I'm also going to add in an assets folder that contains a logo.jpg file inside of an images folder. And these files can be found within your resources files. Next, I'll open up the welcome HTML file and then paste in some HTML, which can also be found in your resources files. Now let's open up our component file. I'll first create a class named welcome component and add in a single property named page title with a type of string, as well as a default value of welcome. Next, I'll create my component decorator. We'll include our metadata here, first adding in a selector with the value of bs-welcome. And now I'm going to add in a template URL setting and define it as the location of our welcome.component HTML file. This HTML file will now be associated to only this component. Notice that the key template URL is different from just that of template, which we defined in our app component file. When assigning a template URL, there's one more step that we need to take, and that is to set up a module ID of module.id. And this step is only needed when we're using System.js as our module loader. And also, we'll make sure to import our component from Angular Core. So let's go back now and open up our welcome component HTML file. In this file, we can see that there is some bootstrap styling defining a panel area along with an instance of the property binding for page title. So now that we've set up our welcome component, let's add this as a directive inside of our app component. So there's two steps involved in actually doing this. The first is we need to add our welcome component to the declarations array inside of our app module file. And we need to make sure that we import it within our file. And now we can add our welcome component selector inside of the template area of our app component. So we'll save all that and restart our application. And now you can see that our welcome component is being displayed inside of our app component within our application. So we'll cover just one more aspect of components here, and that is how to add styling to our specific component. We're able to isolate style selectors to individual components one of two ways, either by defining styles within our decorator like this, and adding our selectors inside of an array. And we need to add quotation marks here, and then the syntax in the same way that we do within a CSS file. I'll flip over to my welcome HTML file and add a new class called byline. So we'll save this page, reload our app, and now you can see that our text gets changed to the color green. You won't usually see styles defined in line within our component like this though. The much more common way of declaring styles is in its own CSS file. So what we can do is add a new CSS file within our welcome file, and we'll call it welcome.component.css. And then inside of our component, we'll change the styles to style URLs, and then we'll reference our new style sheet. And finally, we'll add our style definition to our style sheet. And now we can save these files, reload our application, And you can see that our app hasn't changed, and we're now referencing our new CSS file.